like that, but we're doing pretty well. So in your Bibles tonight, find the little tiny 3-chapter book of Habakkuk, or Habakkuk, or I was telling the boys earlier, the young men in the sound room, sorry fellas, that it's going to be funny when we get to heaven and find out how badly we've butchered these names all these years, you know. And we were talking about Philemon and, what was it? Oh, there's another pronunciation, or you know, there's King Darius or King Darius. You know, everybody's got their own things. And the funny thing is, I bet we get to heaven and find out we were all wrong, and we've totally butchered most of them. So, Book of Habakkuk is an interesting book. So we've looked at a bunch of the minor prophets so far, and typically what we see in these minor prophets is God talks to the prophet, who goes to the people on his behalf and tells them what they're doing wrong, what they need to change, or what their punishment is going to be. Habakkuk is a little different. 2/3 of this book is Habakkuk talking to God and God talking to him, but Habakkuk sees what's going on and he's going to God about it, not the other way around like we see with most of the other prophets. Also, the nice thing for me was studying this out is not a lot of death and destruction and damnation in this book. It's pretty uplifting for the most part. But I found it really neat, though, that the way this book is laid out is totally different than most of the other minor prophets. One thing that's really interesting, if you get through, and I encourage you to study it, the book's 3 chapters and only 56 verses. It's pretty short. But as you're reading through it, one thing that stood out to me was the wording, the phrases we see, things like that remind me a lot of how Paul wrote. Paul quotes Habakkuk, and we'll look at this in a little bit, 3 different times in the New Testament. The same verse, actually. But I found it interesting, though, because it reads a lot differently than a lot of the other prophets. Habakkuk was around preaching, and this was taking place about the same time Jeremiah was preaching in Jerusalem. So Habakkuk knows what's going to happen. During that time, Jerusalem had been raided half a dozen times, I believe, right around there. So he saw, all of this stuff going on. And, like a lot of us, we see things going on. We don't understand why. Habakkuk's got a unique way to start off with this. So chapter 1, verse 1 says, "The burden of Habakkuk the prophet did see. O Lord, how long shall I cry and thou wilt not hear? Even cry unto thee of violence, and thou wilt not save." That's pretty gutsy, isn't it? Habakkuk's like, Lord, how long am I going to have to sit here and pray and plead and beg with you? I cry out to thee of violence. Habakkuk's a man who saw a lot of things going on, and it struck him right to the heart. And he's begging and pleading with God. Why dost thou show me iniquity and cause me to behold grievance? For spoiling and violence are before me, and there are that raise up strife and contention. Therefore the law is slacked, and judgment doth never go forth. For the wicked doth compass about the righteous. Therefore wrong judgment proceedeth. That's a man with a serious burden on his heart for what he sees going on with his people. Now, Habakkuk's not blind to the sins that his people are committing. And we'll see this as we go throughout this book, Habakkuk's biggest problem is he can't understand at first how a good and righteous God could allow this stuff to happen to his people. Sounds pretty familiar today, doesn't it? We have Christians who question things happen to them, just life happens. And people get upset and mad with God, and it's like, God, how can you let this happen? Well, sometimes it's just life. We live in corrupted bodies. Things happen. Sometimes it is chastening. And that good and righteous God will punish. And, Habakkuk's looking at this, and he can't understand it. And, he was there at the time of Jeremiah, and he knows what Jeremiah's preaching. He knows that the Chaldeans are going to come in and take over Jerusalem. The Babylonians, they're going to wipe it out. One of Habakkuk's biggest things is he can't understand how that good and righteous God could take a group of individuals who are more sinful in Habakkuk's eye than the Israelites. And God's going to use that group of very sinful people to come in and punish the chosen people. And Habakkuk can't understand that. It's a lot like us with the way things go in our world today. There's a lot that goes on, a lot that happens. We don't understand, and we can't fathom why it happens. God's got a reason for why it happens. God, has reason upon reason, and we can't understand it. So that's why I said this book is unique because of the minor prophets, because it's a different look at how things are. Joel and Nahum and those guys, God says, look, you guys have been messing up for this long. Here's the punishment that's going to happen. Now, all of those also talk about the restoration of Israel and things like that. So it's not ending in that death and destruction, but it's still there, where with Habakkuk, he's questioning God. You don't see that in the Old Testament. You do some, but not to this point, not to this much, because the whole book is him. Well, not the last chapter, God finally gets Habakkuk to see that he's right. Turn over to chapter 2, verse number 4. We're going to take a look. I told you that Paul quoted a verse out of Habakkuk 3 different times. Chapter 2, verse number 4 says, "Behold, his soul which is lifted up is not upright in him." And here's what Paul quotes: "But the just shall live by his faith." The just shall live by his faith. So flip over to Romans 1:17. Romans chapter 1, verse number 17. Paul writes here, "For therein is the righteousness of God revealed from faith to faith. As it is written, the just shall live by faith." Little wording is just a fuzz different. Habakkuk said live by his faith. Paul just said here shall live by faith. Now flip over a few more pages to Galatians chapter 3. Galatians chapter 3, verse number 11. Paul has it quoted again. Verse 11 says, "But that no man is justified by the law in the sight of God. It is evident, for the just shall live by faith." And the last time is over in Hebrews chapter number 10. Hebrews 10, verse 38. "Now the just shall live by faith. But if any man draw back, my soul shall have no pleasure in him." And yes, I personally feel that and believe that Paul wrote Hebrews. Everybody's got their own opinion. Most things, I tell everybody, when we get to heaven, we'll find out we were both wrong, but we all got to heaven. So that's the big key. But I found it unique that verse, I've read it in the New Testament many times. And to see it here from a man who's basically yelling at God. God, why are you doing this? Why are you allowing this to happen to us? We're your chosen people. And then Paul uses that same quote 3 different times. The just shall live by faith. In Romans, the emphasis was on the just. On Galatians, in context and everything, it's on faith. And in Hebrews, it's on live or living, is the emphasis that Paul uses there. I think it's just really neat how God uses a man who was begging and pleading and yelling and carrying on about what God's doing, God changes his view on it, and Paul, all those years later, knows it because Paul got taught that stuff at an early age and quotes it. Habakkuk, like I said, it's a really neat verse. We read the first, so back in Habakkuk chapter number 1, we read the first 4 verses. And before we move on, those first 4 verses I read right out the gate just to show you that, this man's got a burden on his heart. He's broken for his people. He doesn't understand why God's doing something. A lot of times we don't understand why God's doing something. We don't know what it's going to lead to. We don't know that, why I have to go through what I do might lead because God's got something a whole lot better that I need to learn this lesson for. We need to learn how to do this. We don't know why those things happen. One thing I skipped in my notes here was that verse, chapter 2, verse 4, where he talks about living by faith. I found it neat. Faith is the word's only in the Old Testament twice. It's 247 times in the Bible total, but it's only twice in the Old Testament. I'll read you the first one here real quick. It's in Deuteronomy Chapter 32. You don't need to turn there if you don't want to. I admit, it feels good to have my normal Bible up here. I've been using my other one because the letters are bigger. My eyes aren't what they used to be, but... All right, 32 verse number 20 is the only other time in the Old Testament the word faith is used. And it says, and he said, I will hide my face from them. I will see what therein shall be. And they are a very forward generation, children in whom is no faith. Very, very much a contradiction. You have no faith and just live by faith, and shall live by faith. I found that little tidbit interesting because as I was reading this, I got thinking, I was like, because I've got outlines for all of the minor prophets for this, and I'm like, I don't remember reading faith anywhere. So then I got looking that up, and I thought that was kind of interesting. We are called to live by faith. In the Old Testament, the Jews were to live by the law. They still needed faith in God, that God was going to do and give them everything that he promised, but we don't read about that much. Habakkuk was like a lot of us, though. As I said, he wanted to know why. We ask that all the time. He wanted to understand the whole plan God had. And as we go through this, you'll see some of that. And I encourage you, study this book. It's a great book. But, he's wanting to understand all of this stuff. And like in Deuteronomy 29:29, the Bible says, the secret things belong unto the Lord our God. God's not going to tell us everything. We have a Bible, 66 books of the Bible, nice big thick book, depending on the lettering. If our Bible was twice as big as it is, we'd still want more because we all have questions. There's all these things we want to know. We just need to trust God, and he gave us what we needed. Amen. And he even gave us some of the stuff we kind of wanted, but we always want more, right? We always want to understand more and learn more and question, why is this in the Bible or why is that? There's no answer for that. Well, God's got his reasons, and this book could be 10 times this thick, and it still wouldn't be enough. So Habakkuk had to learn that, not really the hard way, but he was seeing all this violence and, Jerusalem getting raided. Jeremiah's out on the street preaching death and destruction of his nation. Habakkuk's there, he's hearing that. And to break this whole book down, and we'll look at most of it because it's only 56 verses. But the first half or most of chapter number 1 is basically Habakkuk complaining and then God giving him an answer. The second chapter, Habakkuk complaining and God giving him an answer. Chapter 3, we finally will get to where Habakkuk gets it. He understands. I was kind of chuckling about that as I was writing this out, and then I thought, wow, he got it a lot quicker than I do most of the time. Right? I mean, think about it. Things come in our lives or things go on. We complain, we complain, we complain. God answers, and we just don't learn. Habakkuk actually learned, though. He learned pretty quick. But we'll pick back up in chapter 1, verse number 5. This is God answering. The first 4 verses was Habakkuk, as I said, had a complaint. Now we're going to see God's answer. It says, "Behold ye among the heathen, and regard and wonder marvelously. For I will work a work in your days, which ye will not believe, though it be told you. For lo, I raise up the Chaldeans, that bitter and hasty nation, which shall march through the breadth of the land to possess the dwelling places that are not theirs. They are terrible and dreadful. Their judgment and their indignity shall proceed of themselves." We read those first 4 verses. Habakkuk's like, Lord, I'll cry unto thee of violence. Why aren't you listening? How would you like to get that answer from God? You're begging and pleading God, wanting to know why he isn't answering, and when he answers, that's what he tells you? That'd be pretty harsh, wouldn't it? I mean, Habakkuk's looking for that grace, that mercy from God, and this is what God's telling him. Verse 8 says, "Their horses also are swifter than the leopards, and are more fierce than the evening wolves. And their horsemen shall spread themselves, and their horsemen shall come from far, and they shall fly as the eagle that hasteth to eat. They shall come all for violence. Their faces shall sup up as the east wind, and they shall gather the captivity as the sand. And they shall scoff at the kings, and the princes shall be scorn unto them. They shall deride every stronghold, for they shall heap dust and take it. Then shall his mind change, and he shall pass over and offend, imputing this his power unto his God." Like I said, Habakkuk's there on his knees, praying, pleading, begging God to show some mercy and grace. And God finally answered him. And it's not an answer I would want to get. God tells him, look, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to let the Chaldeans come in, that bitter and hasty nation. And they're going to sweep through Jerusalem and through the promised land. And they're going to turn a lot of it to dust. They're going to destroy. They shall come all for violence. That's not what Habakkuk was wanting to hear. I don't know, as I was reading through this last week some, I was looking at that and I'm like, how in the world could you get that kind of news and that kind of information from God and keep going? That'd be kind of harsh, wouldn't it? We complain about the little things, and Habakkuk's getting told, look, it'd be no different than us begging and pleading God not to bring judgment on our nation. And we know what our nation's like right now. And God tells you, Brother Chuck, I'm sorry, but I'm going to let the Chinese come roll through your streets. Be about the same thing, right? Only it was worse for the Jews because that was their promised land from God. That'd be a harsh answer from God. Like I said, there's another complaint from Habakkuk. It starts in chapter 1, verse 12. Art thou not from everlasting, O Lord my God, mine Holy One? We shall not die. O Lord, thou hast ordained them for judgment, and O mighty God, thou hast established them for correction. We'll pause there a minute. That's a big change from how he opened up his original conversation with God, isn't it? Big change. I think, maybe he's starting to see that God actually means what he says. Because he started off with, O Lord, how long shall I cry and thou wilt not hear? Even cry unto thee of violence, and thou wilt not save. Now he starts off a little differently. 13 goes on to say, Thou art of pure eyes, than to behold evil, and canst not look on iniquity. Wherefore lookest thou upon them that deal treacherously, and holdest thy tongue when the wicked devoureth the man that is more righteous than he? And makest men as the fishes of the sea, as the creeping things that have no ruler over them? They take up all of them with the angle. They catch them in their net, and gather them in their drag. Therefore they rejoice and are glad. Therefore they sacrifice unto their net, and burn incense unto their drag, because by them their portion is fat, and their meat plenteous. Shall they therefore empty their net, and not spare continually to slay the nation? Habakkuk's like, God, why? Why is this going to happen to us? These people they're terrible. They're heathens, they're dogs. And you're going to send them here? We're your righteous and holy people. But they weren't following what God had for them. That's why I said when we got started, Habakkuk couldn't really grasp how God could use a terrible heathen nation to punish Israel. I'm going to stand up here and tell you right now, I can't fathom that, why God would do that. But he did. God's done it a few different times. He will use the worst of the worst when he has to. Now, we all know later that God also brings that nation down to its knees and then turns it to dust. But I can't say that I would blame Habakkuk at this point. I couldn't understand that. I don't understand it. Chapter 2 goes on, I will stand upon my watch and set me upon the tower, and will watch to see what he will say unto me, and what I shall answer when I am reproved. Habakkuk knows that God's not probably going to be real happy with the way he'd been crying out. So he's going to sit and wait on the Lord. The interesting part of that is we know what's coming. We read it. God told Habakkuk what's coming. Habakkuk gets on right back after God saying, why? I don't understand. This can't happen. But a neat thing there in chapter 2, verse number 1. Habakkuk said he's going to wait. He's going to wait to hear from the Lord. Now, he's expecting to get reproved, but the key thing is that he's going to wait. Things come along in our lives, and things happen, and we pray, and we don't see any change. And I'm willing to bet a good number of you, or most of you, or all of you are a little bit like me, that I get impatient and start to come up with my own plans and ideas and things to do. It never works out. Habakkuk knows what's going to come, and he decides he's just going to wait on God to answer. He's hoping that everything that God told him is God's going to change his mind. But he's still waiting on the Lord. And the Lord answered me and said, write the vision and make it plain upon tables, that he may run that readeth it. For the vision is yet for an appointed time, but at the end of it shall speak and not lie. Though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come, it will not tarry. Behold, his soul which is lifted up is not upright in him, but the just shall live by faith. Yea, also because he transgresseth by wine, he is a proud man, neither keeper at home, who enlargeth his desire as hell, and is as death, and cannot be satisfied, but gathereth unto him all nations, and heapeth unto him all people. Shall not all these take up a parable against him, and a taunting proverb against him, and say, woe to him that increaseth that which is not his? How long? And to him that ladeth himself with thick clay. Shall they not rise up suddenly that shall bite thee, and wake that shall vex thee, and thou shalt be for booties unto them? Because thou hast spoiled many nations, and all the remnant of the people shall spoil thee, because of men's blood, and for the violence of the land, of the city, and of all that dwell therein. Woe to him that coveteth an evil covetousness to his house, that he may set his nest on high, that he may be delivered from the power of evil. Thou hast consulted shame to thy house by cutting off many people, and hast sinned against thy soul. For the stone shall cry out of the wall, and the beam out of the timber shall answer it. Woe to him that buildeth a town with blood, and establish a city by iniquity. Behold, it is not of the Lord of hosts that the people shall labor in the very fire, and the people shall weary themselves for very vanity. For the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the water covers the sea. That's a great verse right there. God's telling him, these things are going to happen. This people's going to come in. Habakkuk replies, God, how can this group of barbarians, heathens, how can you allow them to come in like this? God said, well, your iniquity, your sin, but I'm going to take care of them too. They're not always going to be a great, powerful nation. I will see to them as well. Verse 15 goes on to say, Woe unto him that giveth his neighbor drink, that puttest thy bottle to him, and makest him drunken also, that thou mayest look on their nakedness. Thou art filled with shame for glory. Drink thou also, and let thy foreskin be uncovered. The cup of the Lord's right hand shall be turned unto thee, and shameful spewing shall be on thy glory. Just a little side note, if you ever wondered what the Bible says about drink, to me that's pretty clear, but I didn't fight my battle with it. The Lord took my battle and just closed it with alcohol, but to me that's pretty clear. For the violence of Lebanon shall cover thee, and the spoil of beasts which made them afraid, because of men's blood, and for the violence of the land, of the city, and of all that dwell therein. What profiteth the graven image, that the maker thereof hath graven it? The molten image, and the teacher of lies, that the maker of his work trusteth therein, to make dumb idols. Woe unto him that saith to the wood, Awake, to the dumb stone, Arise, it shall teach. Behold, it is laid over with gold and silver, and there is no breath at all in the midst of it. But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. I know we just read through a lot. But as I said at the beginning, there's this exchange between Habakkuk and God. Now, Malachi has a little bit of that. But the other prophets, it's, not so much. Jeremiah begs and pleads with God, and God answers him as well. But this whole book is this back and forth. Habakkuk saying why, God tells him why. Habakkuk saying, I don't understand, why is this happening? And God tells him, you don't need to understand it all, but I'm going to tell you this. We read about what's going to happen to them. We read about what God's going to do to that nation then, the Chaldeans afterwards. God lays it out there. Look, I love that verse 20, but the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. We've looked through all the prophets we've looked at so far through this study that God takes things for so long, and then enough's enough. Parents do that with kids. They take things for so long, then you know what? Enough's enough. There's some punishment going to come. Well, God's not any different. He's going to grace and mercy and love, yep, all of that. But at some point, out of love comes a little punishment. I can't say that I am any different than Habakkuk, because I question things all the time. Pastor Capizzi used to call me, what was it he used to say? He had a word he used to call me all the time, because I don't trust anything hardly. I questioned how it could be that easy to get saved before I got saved. I questioned, everybody told me, oh, use the King James Bible. You know what my response was? Why? Well, I studied and found out on my own. People would tell me all this stuff in the Bible, and I'm sorry, most of it I take with a grain of salt and go home and find out myself, because I was 33 when I got saved. I lived in this world. I know what the world teaches and how they teach it and why they teach it, and it was hard for me to swallow those first few years that Christians were any different. I understand now that for the most part, yes, they're extremely different. But I had that questioning spirit. I still do to an extent. I'm inquisitive when it comes to things in the Bible. Inquisitive in my normal life. I guess that's why I'm a decent engineer at work, because I question all that stuff and want to study and learn. And Habakkuk's questioning all these things that God says are going to happen. We know that when God's done with this world, the things that are going to come and happen. We can question and ask and beg and plead with God why billions of people are just going to die, why the rivers are going to be poisoned, and all of that. He's not going to tell us why. Well, we know why it's going to happen, but we still are going to question, God, why are you going to do all of this? Yeah, we know it's all bad and all of this, but why? I've told this story up here before about a little girl who got hit in the face with a baseball and had to have reconstructive surgery on her jaw. A little 8-year-old girl. They get in there to do it, and they find a brain tumor just starting, just early enough to save her life. I bet mom and dad were questioning why about the baseball until that happened. We don't know. God doesn't have to explain that stuff. Once in a while, I find it amusing, reading through the minor prophets, they're questioning things. They're asking God, begging God things. And once in a while, God will indulge them. A lot of times, it's not the answer they were hoping for, but God will tell them why. Not the whole thing. Chapter 3, and we're about out of time, so we won't read all of chapter 3. But chapter 3 is a prayer of Habakkuk. He's finally getting a hold of why this is going to happen. He doesn't like it, but he's finally getting a hold of it. But I want to point out chapter 3, verse 17 and 18. This is, to me, just an amazing couple of verses. Although the fig tree shall not blossom, neither shall fruit be in the vines, the labor of the olive shall fail, and the fields shall yield no meat. The flock shall be cut off from the fold, and there shall be no herd in the stalls. Get this. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will joy in the God of my salvation. Habakkuk finally got it. He's like, all of this death and violence and all these things and this punishment of my nation. And he's arguing with God up to this point, and he finally gets it. He's saying, look, the land's going to be desolate. I know this. And then verse 18, yet I will rejoice in the Lord, and I will joy in the God of my salvation. No matter what this world throws at us, we need to rejoice in the Lord and the joy of the God of our salvation. Things aren't going to get better out there. We know that. The Bible tells us that. But we have that. We have something that this world doesn't have. We can have that joy and rejoice all the time. Now, that doesn't say we're not going to have sorrows and things aren't going to happen. But at the end of the day, that's what we've got. We've got the ability to rejoice in our Lord and the joy of our salvation, knowing that He's in charge. People worry about Washington, D.C. and who's ever in charge. It doesn't matter. When Trump was in charge, our nation, we thought we were doing okay, but the world's still a cesspool. Things weren't getting better. But we have that. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will joy in the God of my salvation. So I'd encourage you this week, no matter what comes your way that we may not understand, rejoice in the Lord and the joy of the God of your salvation. Share it with everybody. We know what's coming. We looked last week at a little bit of the end time stuff. Death, destruction. There'll be, in the first few weeks, there'll be about 3.5 billion people gone, dead. That's nasty to think about, because you ain't getting that cleaned up quick either. But you know what? We know that's coming. We have this. We ought to tell everybody that no matter what this world throws at us, we can rejoice in the Lord and have joy in the